Different musicians have different sorts of relationships with music theory. Now, you might feel like this nagging sense that what's really holding you back as a musician is not really understanding as much music theory as you think you need. Or you might feel like you know a lot of music theory, but it kind of gets in the way of what you want to do as a musician. In this video, I want to talk about how knowing just the right amount of music theory can start this process of learning to play by ear. My name is Peter. Thanks for joining me at Our Worship Sound, where we're making worship keyboard technique and technology easier. Now, before we get into the process of learning to play by ear, I want to talk about a possible misconception. Now, playing by ear doesn't necessarily mean that I can hear this note and know right away that that's an A flat, or I hear this chord and know that that's a D. That's called perfect pitch, and I think it's something that we're more or less born with. The good news is that what's actually more useful is something that we can develop, and that's called relative pitch. And that's just the ability to hear things within a musical context and know what they are. And we can absolutely use music theory to help us gain a better sense of relative pitch. So we're going to talk about the process about how we can clearly identify the key and the scale and think about chords in terms of numbers and scales and all that, but we're also going to talk about how we can begin to hear what these different types of chords sound like. We're going to talk about each of the main chords that fit into a chord progression so that when you listen to music, you'll start to hear those different personalities in the chords as you're listening for them. So first of all, if you've watched any number of my videos, you may have heard me talk about how important it is to clearly identify the key and the scale for any new song or chord progression that you're learning. And that's something that I talk about a lot in my courses as well. The courses are called Fluent Piano. And what we do is we go through that process quite a bit because it is super important. So I don't want to spend a lot of time going through what that process looks like here. But basically, if you take a chord progression like this one, C, G, A minor, and F, and you plug it into a free resource that I have available called the chord reference sheet. If you plug it in there and you identify where all those chords are in this, you're going to find that they pop up more in some rows than others, and there are going to be some rows that have 3 of those chords, but there's only going to be one row that has all 4 of those chords. And so if we do that for this chord progression, we're going to find that that key is C major. That's the only one that has all those chords in it. And as we play through it, it's going to make sense that, yeah, all those chords sound like they fit within the key of C major. From there, we want to be clear about what notes are in the C major scale. So then we can go to this other page that's also available in the same thing. It's the scale reference sheet. So then we're going to play through the scale. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And that's not only going to help us find our chord notes a little bit easier, but now we're also going to be able to think about our chords and how they fit with that scale and relate to it. We're going to give each one of those scale notes a number so that C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, and so on. And then once we know what scale numbers we're working with, we can build a chord off each one of those scale notes. So the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord. Now the good news here is that most of the songs that we're going to play in this style are going to rely mostly on 4 chords. Not all 7 chords within the key, but 4 chords within the key. And those chords are going to be the 1 chord, the chord built off the 4, the 5, and the 6. So as we look at this chord progression, C, G, A minor, and F, we're going to assign a number based on the scale notes. We have C, that's going to be based off the first scale note, so it's the 1 chord. G is the 5 chord. A minor is the 6, which is the only minor chord in this group. And F, which is built off the 4 chord. So we have our 1, 5, 6, 4 progression in the key of C major. Now what we want to do is we want to start to listen for the personalities of these chords within the context, and that's part of developing this relative pitch. As we listen for how these chords function, we're going to hear that 1 chord is pretty settled. It sounds like home. So we might start there, we might end there. At some point when we land on that chord, it's going to feel like all the tension has been resolved and that's home. The 5 chord is probably the opposite of that. That's the one that's going to feel like if we land on there, we're going to feel dissatisfied at the end. Like we feel like that needs to resolve to something else. We don't know where exactly, but we know that it needs to go somewhere. It can't just, it's like too much of a cliffhanger, if you will. The 6th chord sounds like the sad part of the story. It's a little bit more settled, but kind of in that place that you hope it moves on from there to something else. It has a lot of emotional weight to it, kind of a heavier feeling to it. But like I said, that's the sad part of the story. And then the 4 chord It feels like kind of okay. It's kind of settled, but we feel like it probably wants to go somewhere. Now, any of these chords can lead to any of the other ones. So it's not like we're trying to figure out that this chord is always going to go to this chord. That's not the case. But as we begin to listen for how settled these chords are or how much they want to go somewhere else, we're going to hear the different personalities that come out in the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, and the minor 6. So that's what you want to start listening for in the music that you listen to, and also start to analyze in any chord progression or song that you're playing. Begin to think of it and figure out what numbers you're playing within these keys. Let's take a look at a different chord progression. So this one has E flat, B flat, F, and G minor. And if we plug those chords into our chord reference sheet, we're going to find that there's one key that has all 4 chords in that. And it's actually not the first chord in the chord progression, E flat. It's the second one, which is B flat. So the B flat is actually the 1 chord, the first chord of the key signature, or the first chord of the chord progression rather. That E flat is actually the 4 chord. So this one starts on the 4 chord, then it goes to the 1 chord, then that F is the 5 chord, and then of course G minor is the minor 6. And this offers some interesting things here because it lands on the 6th chord at the end, and it's probably going to repeat and go back, and go through it again. But this just gives a little bit different character to the chord progression because of the order of the chords. It doesn't start at home; it gets there on the 2nd chord, but then it goes to a very transient chord, the 5 chord, and then it goes to that darker place with the 6th chord. So this is actually Waymaker, miracle worker. Okay, so you hear the different personalities of these chords coming through. No matter what key it is, they're serving the same function. So then let me do something different. I'm going to play a different song with a different chord progression in a different key. I'm going to set up the keys so you have a context for what we're dealing with. Then I'm going to give you the chance to see if you can identify what chords are in this key. So figure out what number of chords we're dealing with. So here's the key. That's the 1 chord. Okay, so here we go. 1, 2, 3. So there is the 1 chord. The 1 chord is happening at the end of the progression. Okay, so we're going from here to. Okay, did you figure out what chord that sounds like? So this one wants to go somewhere. So here's home. That's the 5 chord that we're starting the progression with, the 5 chord, and then it goes here. Okay, so this one feels a little bit darker. It went up a step, okay, and that's the 6th chord. So we're going 5, 6, then this. Okay, and I already said we're ending with the 1 chord. Can you figure out this one? Okay, that was the 4 chord in there. So we went 5, 6, 4, 1. Can you figure out the song? I will be content in I don't want to sing too much of it because then YouTube is going to flag me for copyright violation. But anyway, so this is a process. Okay, so this is nothing that I'm not trying to promise you that like by tomorrow you're going to start to hear all these chords and these numbers and everything that you listen to. It's going to take some time, but just spend some time with it. This is the process and the road that you want to be on. So work to, when you're learning a song, be clear about the key, be clear about the scale, and then figuring out what chords you're playing and how those numbers fit in with the overall context that you're trying to play. And then for new songs that you're just hearing and trying to figure out, listen for those chords and the relationships and the way that they're functioning together. Okay, so what you can do to start out this process is get that chord reference sheet and the scale reference sheet. If you go to ourshipsound.com/keyboard, you put in your email address and you confirm it, and then that's going to take you right away to a place where you can download. It's called the Music Theory Guidebook. Okay, and there's a collection of resources on that one page. If you look for that, look for the Music Theory Guidebook. Those chord reference sheet and scale reference sheets, that's in that PDF. So you can get that like really quick and get started with this process of using just the right amount of music theory to play by ear. Hope that was helpful. Thanks for joining me at Our Worship Sound. We'll see you soon.